name is Gary Breton, and I am the immediate past president of the World Affairs Council. I'm very pleased tonight to represent my firm, Bacon Wilson, PC, which is sponsoring tonight's dinner. We're very, very excited to have the Congressman with us. Bacon Wilson has been a long-time friend and supporter of Richard Neal for as long as I can remember, and I can remember way back to the 70s and longer. So what I'd like to do is just read you a little brief bio of the Congressman, and then I'd like to relate a little anecdote. So get ready for the anecdote. Congressman Richard E. Neal is a longtime member and friend of the World Affairs Council of Western Massachusetts. He was first elected to the U.S. House of Representatives back in 1988. Since that time, he has proven to be a champion for the constituency he serves in both Western and Central Massachusetts. The Congressman is a native of Springfield, and he began his career in public service in 1973 as an assistant to Springfield Mayor William C. Sullivan. In 1977, he was elected to the Springfield City Council and served as president of the council in 1979. He was elected mayor of the City of Springfield and held that position from 1984 to 1988. He is the ranking member of the Ways and Means Committee in the House of Representatives. He is also the dean of both the Massachusetts Delegation as well as the New England Delegation. He is an at-large whip for the House Democrats. He is the co-chairman of the New England Congressional Caucus, where he advocates for the unique regional interests for the 6 New England states. Congressman Neal is also the Democratic leader of the Friends of Ireland Caucus. He is a longtime lecturer at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst and serves as a national trustee of the John F. Kennedy Library in Boston. Needless to say, on the anecdote side, several years ago, probably 3 or 4 years ago, I was attending the National World Affairs Council Conference in Washington, D.C., and on Thursday evening of the time that you're there, they have embassy visits, and they break up the people that are attending, and you go to an embassy. And I was very fortunate to draw the Irish embassy. And at the time, the Irish ambassador to the U.S. was a gentleman by the name of Michael Collins, who was a very, very, very nice man and a great host. So we go into the embassy, and he's standing in a receiving line, and he's shaking people's hands, and he's welcoming them to the embassy. And I walked up, and I said, nice to meet you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for hosting us. And he said, oh, it's my absolute pleasure. He said, whereabouts are you from? And I said, I'm from Springfield, Massachusetts. And this big grin came across his face, and he looked at me, and he said, Richie Neal country. And the answer is yes. This is very much Richie Neal country. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Congressman Richard Neal.
Thank you, Gary. It's nice of you. I think I'm wired up.
Yes, you're good.
Thank you, Gary, very much for those nice words of introduction. And thanks to all of you, the World Affairs Council, for the invitation you've extended to me this evening. And I want to congratulate our award winners. And certainly to John Morse, special acknowledgement. He comes by once in a while, and I'm a fan of the work he's done in his previous life, as well as the work that he's doing now. And I'm always recommending some book for somebody to read. And Kari Stamper's book, Word for Word, is a great book. She worked at Merriam-Webster, and I must tell you, that app that I use every single day is from Merriam-Webster is just terrific. And I would encourage everybody else to use it as well. And on a special note, Sue Root, I'm so delighted that she was acknowledged tonight. I did not know she was ailing. She and Goldie were great dinner companions over the years. Anytime you could sit with a minister who liked to consume a little wine for a lively conversation, that's what it was about between the two of them. It was a fun night, and you were able to engage any and every topic. So you've probably noticed there's not much going on in Washington these days. Every moment there's something new and engaging. And so one of the things that I think as we finish the World Series in the next couple of days, what's noteworthy is that, so there was this fellow who was playing center field. And he was playing center field and he had his hands on his knees and he was prepared for the next fly ball or the next ground ball or line drive that was going to be hit to him. And the first ball came and it hit him off the head. And the second ball came and he put out his glove and it line drive and it went by him. And the third one went through his legs. The manager was really upset and he said, "You're coming out, I'm going in." So the manager went out to center field and the first fly ball hit him on the head. The second line drive went past him, and the third grounder went through his legs. And he came off the field and said to the other fellow, "You so screwed up that position, nobody can play it anymore." And I think that's kind of where the international debate has gone. And I think that as we speak about Brexit, and I will for the next few minutes, and then be delighted to take any questions that you might have, it seems to me that there were two strategic errors that were made along the way. And the first error was former Prime Minister Cameron's decision to hold a referendum question on Brexit. And the second referendum question that was a mistake was Theresa May's decision to hold a special election, believing that it would strengthen her hand in negotiating Brexit, and instead it weakened her hand. And it has now put her in partnership with not only a slim majority, but the Democratic Unionist Party in the north of Ireland, which has limited the parameters that she will have and they will have, because theirs will, in the conclusion, become a fairly narrow interest. And what's significant about this is the following. The issues that brought about Brexit are continuing to roil much of Western and Eastern Europe, and clearly had a huge result of what happened in America last November. Open borders, immigration, and really the lack of economic growth until recently across much of Europe and the United States. And when that happens and incomes become stagnant, I think people then begin to lash out. And they begin to take positions at campaign time that they might not ordinarily or previously have taken. So I'm going to specifically reference my comments to the border in the north of Ireland and then talk about that referendum question in Great Britain, because Farage embraced many of the same tactics that Donald Trump embraced here in America. Closure of immigration, blamed the immigrants for wage stagnation, and essentially said that it had to be a Great Britain for the British people. What's compelling about what happened is that the people of Scotland voted to stay in European Union by a significant margin. The people in the north of Ireland, they voted to stay in European Union by a significant margin. The people who live in what we would call England or London, they voted to stay. But the rest of the countryside, through Cornwall and other places, they voted by substantial numbers to leave. And the question was posed simply as, leave or stay. The determination became, even though there was a low voter turnout, the determination became that they were going to leave European Union. Now, Great Britain, or the United Kingdom, was also unique in the sense that while they were in European Union, they didn't have both feet in European Union. And the reason for that was they refused the currency of European Union and they refused to embrace the euro as a denomination. And instead, they decided to stay with sterling as the transactional piece. Prime Minister Thatcher took a more nationalistic view. Labour prime ministers took what they thought to be a more European view of integration in what was happening. And by and large, much of what has been described as questionable has largely worked. But wage stagnation, again, I think has kept people very divided. Now let me speak specifically to that border, if I can. 29 years ago, I was on a bus moving from Donegal to Derry. And while I was on that bus with the Speaker of the House, Tom Foley, as we got to the border in the north, the bus was stopped and British soldiers mounted the bus. They were armed and used night vision on the bus and searched everybody's bags and went through every possession that you might have had. The point is that 30 years ago, the north of Ireland was a militarized state, an area the size of the state of Connecticut, where there were 30,000 British soldiers on the ground. Operation Banner was the longest-standing military commitment in British history. And the dispute over that border is the longest-standing political dispute in the history of the Western world. In the run-up to the Good Friday Agreement, a decision was made to hold a referendum question. And the referendum question was that people in the North and people in the Republic of Ireland would cast a ballot on what they perceived to be a common destiny or future. Now, let me just say this to you, because some of you have worked with me for a long time. I have a pretty practical view of things. I don't want to use Machiavellian terms, but I have a pretty conventional approach to how far people can go in negotiating. There is a danger when we embrace the tactics of a plebiscitary democracy, because then we vote on the emotion of the moment. The genius of what our framers did was to put a little bit of separation between the emotions of the American people and dates certain for elections. So what we can say tonight is we know when the next election is going to be in November of next year, on the first Tuesday after the first Monday. And the presidential election 2 years after that on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. We know the date of the election. So we don't succumb to the temptation of the moment to put emotion in front of decision making. Instead, in a representative democracy in which we live, we entrust those of us whom we vote for, even when we're upset with them, to cushion, to serve as a shock absorber on emotions. And this is hardly a new debate. Jefferson and Hamilton debated it vigorously as to how far removed the elected ought to be from the emotions of the people. But a referendum question was held on the island of Ireland, and the people on both sides of the border voted for a new future. With the disarmament of the IRA and the disarmament of the paramilitaries on the loyalist side, a new day was born. And even now, nobody talks about going back to violence. That is history. But what is significant is that we are back to some hiccups over what to do about moving the assembly forward. I've been in contact with the Secretary of State, Mr. Brokenshire. I talk to him regularly. I've talked to the leader of Sinn Féin, Gerry Adams, and I've been in touch with the Foreign Minister of Ireland, Simon Coveney, and was at the Irish Embassy about a week ago to discuss what they thought I might do to encourage the people who are on both sides of the divide and who are friends, to nudge them forward. I had some fun with the Prime Minister because if the institutions continue to be at stalemate, that means they'll return to direct rule from London while they try to sort their differences. And I was kidding the foreign minister. I said, for God's sakes, we've spent 800 years trying to get them off this island. Why would we invite them back? And the point is that it is men and women of goodwill who, inside of the crucible of politics, try to find common purpose. The problem with Brexit is the divorce is final. So if you might ask how I spend my time, Liam Fox came by, who was one of the leading Brexiteers, and after Bombardier, he is second in charge. And I said to him, is there any prospect of revisiting this vote, given the fact that polling now says if they were to revisit it, they would not leave? Because the reality now has settled in of what this means to GDP, what it means to London as the center of finance in much of Europe, and certainly what it means to people across the rest of Europe. And as you can see, the divorce is not going well with the rest of the European Union. They want a significant settlement, estimated to be north of 60 billion euro, as a departing number. The question then comes on what to do about the border in Ireland. Understanding the following, that there can be no return to a hard border. I have argued that vociferously with the ambassador from Great Britain, the Secretary of State, We need to get used to that border, because when I spoke earlier of moving from Donegal to Derry with a militarized force and being searched, I did it 2 summers ago. My phone pinged. That was it. The phone pinged. You travel now from Newry to Belfast like it's nothing. Up through County Down, back and forth to Derry, you don't even know you're crossing the border. Now, unionists tend to be more rigorous in their objections to those simple terms. Nationalists say, as they always have, this is our land. This is our land. And we tried to find, in the negotiations that I participated in for more than 35 years, we tried to find a compromise between the planter and the Gael. The idea was that you could, in the genius of the Good Friday Agreement, in which the American dimension was indispensable, in the Good Friday Agreement, what is significant about its genius is the following. You want to be Irish in the North? Proclaim you're Irish. You want to be British in the North? Proclaim you're British. But live side by side and have the same aspirations for that small geographic area. The other significant portion of what's happened is that for the first time in the last round of elections, unionists are now a minority. In terms of demographic trends, the significance is it's now at about 53 to 47, and the nationalist community over the next 10 to 15 years will have the larger number. And then you move to what people have asked for, a referendum on unification. One of the things that Prime Minister Varadkar has done is he has suggested now, as an ameliorating factor, what they might entertain is the idea of granting to people in the North the idea that they could become holders of Irish passports. Now, that will not go down well with some of the unionist community, but it does get them through the thicket of Brexit because it keeps commerce alive. Small but significant example. Guinness. Guinness is produced in Dublin, it's canned in Belfast, and it's sold across the globe. Dairy products, commerce. People move back and forth across the border. The border is 310 miles long. During the worst moments of the long dispute, during the worst moments, there were 20 passable entrances and exits. Today, there are 275. 10,000 people alone in the border counties go back and forth to work without being checked, without being searched, without being held. The watchtowers are gone. British soldiers are gone. The Royal Ulster Constabulary has been reformed. And it's a new day where people sort their differences in an elected body. The danger is that if you go back to a hard border, you have to figure out what you're going to do about tariffs. You have to figure out how to reconcile a tariff issue on every product that's going to move back and forth across that border. My suggestion has been a relationship similar to what Norway has with European Union. They kind of take the best of what's offered, participate at least on the periphery, but are not necessarily part of European Union. Now, in the Republic of Ireland, and this is a pretty stunning statistic, many people here, as you know, in the Valley, trace their antecedents to the Republic and to the North, as many of us in this room tonight do. But what's interesting about that debate and that history is that when you consider what's happened to international trade, it's not only fascinating, the commerce, how it's been promoted, but I'm going to give you a statistic that you'll be thinking of tonight. 10% of the people in the Republic of Ireland are now foreign-born. You are likely at a pub in Dublin, which I have visited once or twice, you are likely at a pub in Dublin to have a Polish bartender. That's how things have changed. The challenge is, because of open borders, as the economy in Poland has gotten better, they're leaving to go back to Poland. So this whole idea of free migration across Western Europe has been challenged. The difference is that young Irish see themselves now as Europeans. And people in the north of Ireland, they see themselves as Europeans, and trying to get them to reconcile that small difference about their history is a challenge for all of us. The Good Friday Agreement is 20 years old next year, and George Mitchell and I are going to celebrate it, and we're going to congratulate those that had the courage. You know, one of the things in politics that's very, very difficult is to tell people you love they're wrong. It's always easy in politics to tell people you don't like they're wrong. Try telling people that like you and that you like, I'm sorry, on this one we're not with you. And I think that's part of the challenge that the people have in both sides of the divide still. But today, unlike previous generations, it's a very prosperous country. And trying to figure out the relationship in what is known as Strand 2 of the Good Friday Agreement. Strand 2 of the Good Friday Agreement was everything to us who supported the nationalist position. Because Strand 2 said, Belfast, Dublin. You couldn't get, 25 years ago, Ian Paisley to visit Dublin. Because he said, when he was introduced to the Irish ambassador, he said, nice to meet you, the Irish ambassador of the Irish nation. It counts for little here in Belfast. But he came to see the light. And the hardest man in the end made the agreement that got us to the Good Friday reconciliation. And now getting them to sit in government every day shouldn't be as difficult as it is, but the issue of Brexit runs the risk of bringing up some old antagonisms. Because people retreat to their own corner based upon identity politics. The whole notion that I think is now pervasive in Western Europe and the United States that is growing more and more problematic for us, it's the idea of economic nationalism. We're retreating from globalization. And I must tell you this, even as a member of a party that doesn't all share my view on this, I think protectionism is a dangerous undertaking. It is too easy today for goods and currency to flow past borders. And by the way, congratulations to you who brought these young people from Wilbraham Munson Academy tonight. I guarantee you this, they're going to embrace globalization. They're going to see themselves as citizens who use the phone and the internet. They're going to embrace trade and economic opportunity. They're going to say, the boundary is what we decide it's going to be. But we're going to take advantage of all those opportunities. And that's what's happening across the globe. So the closing note that I would have is I think there is still time to sort Brexit. I know that the Irish Prime Minister is keen to negotiate on terms that are favorable to keeping that border soft and open with no infrastructure barriers on that border. And let the men and women of goodwill move back and forth across that border and sort their differences the way we do in an elected body, but not to embrace the fear that for centuries kept those people apart. So with that, I'd be happy to take some questions that you might have. And remember, I was mayor, so you can't hurt my feelings.
Hello, I think I'm the only Irish person here. Hello. So,
Kathleen Murphy's right back there, I can tell you.
Kathleen. No, my question is, I'm obviously heavily invested in this question, and I've been reading a lot about it in the papers of Ireland, and there's an awful lot of mixed opinion about it. There's this idea I've been reading about the 51%, where if 51% majority, both sides of the border, wanted a united Ireland, that it's not the right decision because it's not strong enough of a majority. I'm wondering about what the American opinion is on that, as well as the British stance to where they stand on Northern Ireland, because I understand that it's an economic issue for them because they're actually losing money with it. And I'm wondering, like, what's the American understanding or position on this?
Well, the debate has gone long, as you know.
Yeah.
And what's kind of interesting for those of us who were in Dublin to celebrate the centenary of the Rising, it was a remarkable show, not of triumphalism, but of the idea of self-determination. And I was to the British Embassy at the end of Tony Blair's time and tenure. And I give Blair great credit for the success that occurred. And I want to give John Major credit for what happened. When John Major said that Great Britain has no long-term strategic interest in Ireland, many of us said, that's a stunning statement for a British Prime Minister. Followed up by Tony Blair, who took it to the next level, elevated the consciousness of all, and helped make the agreement that led to Good Friday. But at the embassy, what I thought was interesting, he had the Friends of Ireland there that night. And he said, America and Great Britain agreed on just about everything. He said, except Ireland. And he said, I know what that was because Gladstone and Churchill, in honor of what you do tonight, Gladstone and Churchill said in both instances, we can subjugate Ireland. Our problem is what America will respond to us with, because we will not subjugate the Irish in America, who will continue to make these demands. And as you recall, one of the things that Roosevelt did with Churchill in the run-up to the peace accord at the end of World War II, he said to Churchill, if you think this is about empire, you're going to lose me as a partner. So I think that in the Good Friday Agreement, it calls for the opportunity for a referendum question. I tend to support the idea that you're going to have to convince the Unionists that there is no threat to their identity in a united Ireland. They see themselves as being British, and I think that no matter what we say, they've lived on that island for 300 years. You can argue about how they got there, but I will also say that when they have come to America, like those from the Republic, they've been extraordinarily successful. They went to the Carolinas. People in the Republic went to the East Coast and through Chicago and big cities. So from Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, that's where they settled as planters. And I think that for all of us, one of the lessons that came from the IRA, you will not bomb them into a united Ireland. And I think that the referendum question, when Ireland gave up claim to the North and the British gave up a claim to the North, was the correct compromise. And the next step that we take ought to be a referendum question. But we've got to prepare people on both sides for that question because demographics are leading in that direction.
That answers my question.
It was a long answer, I'm sorry.
It was, no, but it was good. Also, like, I feel, from an Irish perspective, I feel the atmosphere within and the attitude towards the north of Ireland is very different, especially seeing as, God rest him, Martin McGuinness is passing. Do you think that's significant as well in going forward? Because he was a very strong echo of keep maintaining that agreement.
Well, for all those of you who, he's referring to Martin McGuinness. Martin McGuinness's youth was spent as the dairy commander of the IRA. And for him to make the move to representative democracy is compelling. And people would say to me, some of our own people, as we were down the home stretch of the agreement, they were, in some cases, not happy with the agreement because they thought it should be all we wanted immediately. And my response to them was, I'm not more Irish than Jerry Adams or John Hume or Martin McGuinness. If they say the agreement's good, who are we to dispute the agreement? And the Good Friday Agreement has held the test of time, and I would say to the militants on both sides, the Good Friday Agreement is the only way forward.
I'd like to change the subject a little bit, but stay on trade.
Yep.
And hear what you have to say about Nafta, because it has some similarities. And of course, it is an important a trade agreement which has had its pluses and minuses. I think you probably favored it initially, and that was fine. But when you start breaking things up that are moving, it's not the same as starting over.
It's a great question, and as you know, President Trump had great electoral success by calling attention to what he saw as the shortcomings of trade. What's interesting is that the people in America who have done the best with trade come from the agricultural states, and they voted for him. So the problem he's going to have going forward is trying to convince the agricultural states to abandon these trade positions. They are not likely to do that. which makes it more complex. I had a funny moment at the White House, and I should just share this with you. I was there in March, and I was there again a couple of weeks ago. And as you've probably noticed, the president tends to speak in absolute terms. There's very little gray when he gets done. And when we walked in, myself, Ron Wyden, Orrin Hatch, and Kevin Brady, the two Democratic and two Republican leaders of the two committees that handled trade, the president said, NAFTA was the worst trade agreement in the history of the world, until somebody mentioned China. And then that became the worst trade deal in the history of the world. And by the time we left, we were arguing about Panama. Now, let me just I had the U.S. Trade Rep in the other day to meet the Democrats on the Ways and Means Committee. He's a very capable guy. And so he said to me on the phone recently, he worked for Bob Dole for years. And he said, you know, some of these trade agreements are awful. And I said to him, Mr. Ambassador, how many did Dole vote against? And he said, good question. And he laughed. Because the agricultural states benefited. Manufacturing took some hits. There's no doubt about that. But when I look at the issue, for example, of Panama and a trade agreement with Panama, the Panamanians have just expanded the Panama Canal to double the size of the tankers that can go through the Panama Canal. And where are they coming? They're coming up the East Coast to the port of Boston, which is about to be dredged to the tune of $1 billion to accommodate the size of those tankers. I'm okay with revisiting NAFTA. I'm okay with revisiting PNTR with China. But the idea ought to be to improve them, because I don't know anybody who says that we're going to be able to abandon them the way that citizens of Great Britain have abandoned Brexit. I listened yesterday for 1 hour to a show that I would recommend, Freakonomics, on NPR. And they did a piece on Germany yesterday that was remarkable. How Germany absorbed East Germany to one country, how the bumps they took in currency, trying to integrate them into Germany, and then talked about how their labor agreements are different than some of ours. But that's the lesson for all of us. You know, the seafaring people of Western Europe, they're free traders. The Europeans are free traders. And on the coasts of America, we're free traders because we tend to benefit from it. The parts of the heartland, including places like Ohio, they've been hit. And trying to figure out how to get them back into apprenticeship programs and community colleges, and a new investment, by the way, in vocational education in America. This should be part of competition. These young people that are in the room here tonight, they're going out to compete in a global economy, and they're going to be ready. There is a problem with people at the lower end of the economic spectrum in America who have been dislocated. And part of it is we moved from, at one time, an agricultural economy to a manufacturing economy to a service economy. And I would say this to you tonight, though. There are 2 million manufacturing jobs right now in America over the next 4 or 5 years. 2 million. Right now, there are 6 million jobs in America that go unanswered. 6 million. In New England, right this moment, 18,000 precision manufacturing jobs go unanswered. In the smallest geographic area of the country, the median wage in America is $59,000. These jobs pay $66,000, $67,000. They're unionized jobs with great health benefits and a great retirement package. So what's happened to us in terms of aligning the opportunities for work and the people who left the economy in the midst of the recession and have not returned? Because Ken, since you gave me this opportunity, I'm just going to take 2 more minutes on it, because this excites me. That Webster's Dictionary and crazy, I get in. I get excited about this stuff. But the real problem that we have in America economically now is the labor participation rate. And one of the nice things about my position is that Janet Yellen came to see me last week. And for an hour, we went back and forth. She agrees with my idea about investing in human capital for these jobs that are available. Part of the problem we have with the worker participation rate in America is the following. Since the end of World War II, about 2/3 of the American people have gone to work every day, 66%. In the aftermath of the recession, that number is at 62.8% now. The number of men across the country sitting home playing video games in the afternoon because of a skill set loss coupled with 2 million people that are opiate addicted in America. This is the real problem that employers are having today, trying to get people back to work. Example, I recently had a visit from Schott Fiber Optics in Southbridge. It's a German company. Nice little company, good wages, good job security, good benefits. And the owner of the company came in to visit with me, German fellow, and he said, I want to tell you, Congressman, in Southbridge, Massachusetts, I would hire 24 people tomorrow. So my reaction is, I'm getting the president of STCC, and we're going out to visit him to align opportunities with the jobs that are available. So part of this problem is that globalization, the decline of unionism, the increase in temp work, they've all changed the nature of work in America, but 6 million jobs, shame on all of us that those jobs go unfilled. Yes, please.
When the UK left, had the Brexit referendum, they made the decision to leave the EU. At the time they made that decision, you can't help but think in the back of their minds they thought they would be able to renegotiate some type of agreement with the EU. At the same time, you would think that they had in the back of their mind that they would be able to negotiate some type of a trade agreement with the United States.
Right.
When that was approached in the Obama administration, the president basically took the position that the UK was not going to go to the head of the line, but actually was going to go to the end of the line. That seemed a surprising position, considering the long-term relationship that the UK and the U.S. has had, especially, for example, in the case of Iraq. Why did the Obama administration do that?
I don't know why, but I think that he took the position to support the rest of European Union. And recall that he kept a pretty close relationship with many of those European countries. And President Trump has said we can negotiate a bilateral agreement with the United Kingdom. We can't. It'll take 5, 6, 7 years. So it's a long time investment. And I think that trying to figure out a common travel area and trying to keep some sort of a trade agreement between the United Kingdom and the rest of Europe should be a priority. But there's another occurrence that's happening right now, and that is the rest of European Union, they're in a vindictive mood toward Great Britain. They are really upset about what's happened. And they are demanding huge reparations in terms of monetary awards. So I think this is not going to go very well. In Prime Minister May's narrow political coalition, that could fracture any day. So I think that a lot of this is very uncertain. The Redekers are here.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you for coming again tonight. When I saw you last year in Washington, you stood up there with Kevin Brady, the head of your committee, and talked about how you both want what's good for the country, but you both get there different ways.
Yeah.
So the question is Kevin Brady with tax reform going to do what Trump wants, or where does he stand on it, and what do you think is going to happen in terms of tax reform?
I thought one of the funniest lines I've heard in a long time, and I'm going to come right to your question, but I thought one of the funniest lines that I've heard in months. They said to Paul Ryan, how are you going to do this trade deal? And he said, well, I understand the president's going to be in Asia. He said, that might help. But I also think that, and I'm going to say this about Kevin Brady, he's a terrific guy, and he's a good friend. And Paul Ryan's a friend of mine. So the differences that we have are not personal. I want to see how we can improve the bill. And I think there's some legitimacy to the arguments that both sides are offering. But the Congress I signed up for used to find common purpose and agreement on those differences. It's a lot more difficult today. And I would submit to you that as we've elected more and more of the purists to Congress, the antis to Congress, it's become harder to make the deals because they run against the institution. And while you run against the institution, then they declare treason on anybody in their own party who tries to find an agreement on the other side. And I think that's going to be part of the problem going to tax reform. And, you know, you could see what happened with the president's position on the Affordable Care Act. And my hunch is that there's at least a 50-50 prospect that's going to happen with taxes as well. Nobody really knows what President Trump is, Republican, Democrat. Nobody really knows. And he's more critical of them on a daily basis than he is of us. And I think that in his own side, there's a lot of lip biting that's taking place. And I also think that we're going to see the package from the Republicans in the House on Wednesday for the first time. And let's see where it goes. I want revenue neutrality, middle class out, and I want some investment in human capital, meaning community colleges and the programs I mentioned earlier. That's what we should be on it. Another one, please.
You mentioned identity politics. What do you think can be done in terms of both globally and locally to counter the negative effects of this?
Well, I think the problem with identity politics is that it's contrary to what America intended in our mission statement with the framers and the founders. The idea that we would be the beacon of opportunity and light for the rest of the world that would draw people here. And they would bring with them the best skills because opportunity would exist here. And even now with this debate that we have over immigration, where would the big tech companies in America be if they didn't have these immigrants? I can understand the idea clearly. If somebody's been charged with a felony, you're out. You go. I'm fine with that. But I also think that a path to citizenship should be there that was available to my grandparents. And they work hard. You know, I always use the example for two families. They found time to have 7 sons join the military. And they took citizenship in one case at a very late time in life. But I also think that we've got to get to this point where many of the people that are in this room who immigrated, it's both feet in. I want to be an American. And I think that if we don't push that argument, then we end up with people that in my judgment, we're going to continue to have this argument over their status in America. And I think, you know, if you go to these ceremonies, as I have many times with the new Americans, if that doesn't tug your heart with emotion, you know, because one of the things I also point out for the immigrant classes that have come to America, they want to make America great too. And that's really important. Aspiration and opportunity. And in a lot of ways, they are super patriots. Yep.
When you said earlier that Britain already had one foot out of the door when talking about the differences in currencies, were you sort of implying that you think Brexit was an inevitable choice for Britain?
I don't know that I would say that it was inevitable, but I do think that Margaret Thatcher had a view of nationalism that was very different than what David Cameron and others might have seen coming. And if you recall, she resisted from day one the use of the European Union currency, the euro. And currency is really important. I will always hear people say, for example, well, what about going overseas with the dollar? One of the great things about America is the following. I've never been any place in the world where they won't take that dollar, right? And those young kids, if you want to buy something, they do the transaction in their head over the idea of what currency is at that day. But I had a funny story that I can repeat in Derry. There was a time if you went to the north, a unionist shopkeeper or publican would not take the punt. They said it was dirty money because it came from the Republic of Ireland. I was there at a pub 2 summers ago in Derry, and I said to the publican, I said, I've got a euro. You all right with that? He said, oh, I'm fine. He said, if you'll take the change in sterling. That's a huge step in the right direction because currency helps to define us. It's like language. It helps to define us. So I think that Thatcher's sense of nationalism and Great Britain's history of going it alone, I think that had much to do with it by the time it got to Farage and open immigration. And let's not kid ourselves about what happened with immigration. It really was a big contributing factor because people, when their salaries don't go up, they say, oh, they're taking our jobs at a lower wage. And I think that contributed to the vote. You know, if you go to Cornwall, one of the things I found fascinating on a PBS special, a couple of days after, because remember the Cornish see themselves as a separate people with a separate identity. But they were in Cornwall interviewing people who had voted for Brexit, and they said, you realize this is going to happen? They said, no, that's not going to happen. We're going to stay the way it is. No, you're not. There's going to be some hardships, but good question. Yes, please.
To revisit these many jobs that are unfilled, millions, just to go back to what you and I were speaking of as we walked in, 1/3 of young American men have arrest records, not conviction records,
Yep.
Arrest records, and in some communities, particularly in the black community, it's as high as 50%. Yep. And the thing of it is with the internet, the arrest record lives on forever. And it goes into these sites, and employers will not touch these people with a 10-foot pole. And so they sit at home, either on unemployment or disability, and they would like to work.
Right.
They have not been convicted of anything in many cases, and I don't want to say anything negative about the police. My father was a criminal courts judge. I was very tight with the police growing up and always have been. But the fact is, in some cases, it's punitive, it's overreaction. I've heard tremendous stories of disbelief, you know, I find it quite hard to believe. So you have 1/3 of the young men. And so we need some kind of reform because you can take an unvetted immigrant or and they will be hired instead of a citizen who only has an arrest record on the internet. And these...
No, that's a fair question. Fair question. I think you're right. And I think that that has to be revisited. And we are in the midst of trying to find a compromise with both sides. And I thought we were going to find one by the last part of last year. But conservative Republicans and liberal Democrats and moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats all agree with what you just said. And that's part of the demographic trend in filling some of these jobs. I mean, people that have an arrest record for something that is short of a felony should not be denied the opportunity for gainful employment.
I'll take this one step further. It is the internet, and I don't believe that a name should be associated with an arrest on the internet until it's a conviction.
Well, I don't think that's going away, to be honest with you. I mean, the internet, Google, Twitter, and Facebook are all on the grill Wednesday because now people are beginning to question how that information is sourced to the American people. And Mark Zuckerberg, who has done wonders for technology and created real wealth for millions of the American people, he argues that he is not a media outlet. He's an aggregator of information. My hunch is that's going to be challenged. Yeah.
So you've spoken quite a bit about globalization, and as someone who's currently studying its importance, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about one significant pro and one significant con of globalization and its effects.
I think globalization, the con is that it hurts people with limited skills. And that's clear across Western Europe and the United States. When you consider that production can be done anywhere on the globe right now, what sets America apart from the rest of the world? Innovation and creativity. The great genius of invention is still here in America by far. And the longer answer is, one of the reasons I was so vociferous in my support of the automobile bailout was because if that research and development left America, it was never coming back. That's the reality of it. So we do creativity and innovation better, but we've got to figure out with globalization how those who fall through the safety net hit a trampoline and bounce back up into mainstream economics. And again, 1/3 of the people in West Virginia are now receiving some sort of a federal benefit. 1/3. And part of the problem is they have not been able to make the transition from coal to the renewables. And we can have every argument here tonight about the economy, but the following is true. Natural gas put coal on the sidelines. That's the economic reality. So the idea that we're going to get in front and stop these innovations, I mean, all you have to do is visit San Francisco or visit Silicon Valley, and you come to the conclusion fast, or to go to some of the companies in 495 here. The pharmaceutical giants in Cambridge. Here's an example, and I would encourage maybe the class to take a look at this, go and see it. Kendall Square in Cambridge, Massachusetts, today has the highest concentration of research and development in the world. In the world. So who's getting the rewards? Smart kids. Smart people are going to be rewarded. The unemployment rate, despite all the talk about it, the value of a college education, the unemployment rate in America for the college educated is about 3%. So these are the things, and part of the other difficulty in globalization is, I think that if you've got an individual who has put in 30 years at a company with a high degree of skills, and all of a sudden that skill set is no longer honored, it's hard to say to them that they're going not to a lower wage, but it's the psychological debilitation that takes place as well. And I think that's part of the problem. Yeah. Please.
What's your feeling as far as what might happen to the secessionist movement in Spain, and if various segments of European countries start seceding, how will the European Union react to that?
Well, I think that I followed it with some interest, to be honest with you, because I thought of Spain as being sort of a docile place. I mean, Barcelona is doing great these days. The rest of Spain is not doing so great. Catalonia is doing superb. So again, the reminder is of economic prosperity, what it does. And part of this issue is how well Catalonia does, and they see themselves with a separate identity. And I think that this isn't the first dispute. As you can see across Europe, there are a number of secessionist threats. And I think European Union has got to come to grips with the changes that have taken place with migration as well. And so my sense is we haven't seen, although this was sort of a calm divorce. You know, the Prime Minister was ordered not to show up for work this morning. I dare say in most countries that wouldn't go very far. But he was ordered not to show up this morning for work, and again, the Spanish government is taking a much more vigorous attitude than they were a month ago. It's hard to see how you can have a referendum question and have such a small turnout and then say that's destiny. So that example I use of the precedent in the north of Ireland, there has to be a referendum question. The gentleman asked a good question. Does 51% sustain it? And I think you probably need a little bit more of a cushion, but we subscribe to the idea of 50 plus 1 in a democracy. Yeah. Please, sir.
So I started at Boston College in 1999, and it was $32,000 a year.
Yep.
And I just happened to look at the cost of tuition this year, and it was $68,000.
Yeah.
And I'm coming up on my 15th year anniversary. How do we in this country not create an elite class where only the wealthy can afford these kind of institutions?
Well, I can give you part of an inside view. I was on the Board of Trustees at Mount Holyoke for 10 years. In fact, one of the few males on earth that can say, I hold a degree from Mount Holyoke College. I had lunch with Lynn Pasquarello last week, the former president, who granted that degree to me. It's a huge issue. $1 trillion worth of debt now in America for college education. In every economic argument, there's one upside. You know how good those students are at UMass today? They are spectacular. That honors college, Commonwealth College, what's happened? Because those kids now, they figured out their parents can't afford 68 grand. And the university is still a pretty good deal. The community college system is a pretty good deal. I have a similar experience. My daughter went to Boston College, and it was pricey then when she was there. With 3 others in college at the time, it was really pricey. By the way, that's one of the reasons I was at UMass teaching, to make sure that was covered. But I agree with you. George Washington is higher than that. And here's another side of it for, I know the Redekers and others real entrepreneurs out there. Here's the other side of the problem with college debt. Kids can't pick up and move anymore. They're stuck living in their parents' attic or in the cellar. So that kid that has the great idea, he's so worried about paying bills that he's living at home, there's no chance for him to go and spread his wings. No, good, very good question. Yeah. Please, yeah.
The Trump administration has been hinting at maybe minor changes or maybe severe changes for Medicare. Is Medicare at risk for any drastic changes during this administration?
Well, I'm not going to vote to change Medicaid right now. I think that 23 million more Americans have health care. The problem that the gentleman raises is a good one, though, because the challenge is that Medicaid's not a great payer.
I'm talking about Medicare.
Oh, Medicare, okay. Medicare, some would argue, isn't a great payer as well, but it's a very good, consistent payer. And I can just say this to you tonight, that for those of you who question some of the government role in health care, half of the health care system in America is already government delivered. Medicare, the VA, and Medicaid. Now, Medicare is a bit of a challenge only because of the following, the political dynamic. Medicare recipients vote. They get the dynamic of Medicare. Now, you're going to be surprised to hear this, but it's entirely accurate. Fewer people administer Medicare than any private insurance company in America. The efficiencies of Medicare are pretty good, really good. And doctors will say it's our best consistent payer, even if it's sometimes not our best numeric payer. So I'm a defender of Medicare. I think that one of the great things about Medicare is you turn 65, you're in. No test of race, gender. Nobody says, do you live in a red state or a blue state? Nobody says, what's your political designation? You hit 65, you join the club. And always remember, Medicare was an amendment to the Social Security Act. Lyndon Johnson signed the Medicare Act in Harry Truman's living room because Truman had proposed national health insurance. I went to see that, stand in that living room where Johnson signed that document that changed the way we live in America. The poor in America used to be the elderly. They're not the poor anymore because of Social Security and Medicare and private pensions. And I think that on the Medicare front, Medicare is the biggest payer here in the Valley. You know that? Medicare is the biggest payer. Half of the revenue at Bay State Medical Center at least comes from Medicare. Another 15% from Medicaid. Holyoke Hospital, it's closer to 85% Medicare and Medicaid. The consolidation of the hospitals are all a reflection of that. The bigger hospitals are growing. Smaller hospitals need a parent. But Medicare is really the glue that helps to hold the system together, and it's added years to life and life to years. And the other nice thing about Medicare, when you visit a senior center, there used to be a time where it was just about a little bit of lunch. I mean, now they've got their sneakers on, and they're going to the casino, and they're going off to a second job, or they're going off to jog or yoga. Thanks, Mr. Johnson, for the genius of Medicare. It's been extraordinarily successful. So I also just say this to you, and I don't want this for 1 second to be partisan. Before we talk about big tax cuts at the top, sustaining Medicare ought to be a part of our goal. Please.
The clock is ticking. Is there any movement in the leadership of the Congress to save the DACA kids?
Yeah, there'll be a deal by the end of the year. There's going to be an agreement by the end of the year. And to be candid with you, I think there's increasing leverage on our side for the deal, because right now we see a bigger deal on Medicare, we see a deal on DACA, we see a deal on Medicaid, and we see a deal on building the subsidies to sustain the ACA. We think that all inures to our benefit as we get to the end of the year when the alternative becomes people losing health insurance. Yeah. That it? You couldn't have been any nicer. Thank you all very much.
We have a gift for you.
Thanks.
This is Never Look an American in the Eye, Flying Turtles, Colonial Ghosts, and the Making of a Nigerian American by Oki and Debbie. I think you'll especially enjoy it because it's about the immigrant experience, and much of it is based in Western Massachusetts.
Okay, thank you.
So
That was
thank
great.
you.
Thanks, Sid.
Thank you.